The sun was bleeding into the horizon, casting a golden haze over the small western town of Dry Creek. Jack Harlow, a quiet rancher with calloused hands and dust-worn boots, was trudging back from the trading post with a burlap sack slung over his shoulder. His mind was on nothing more than the chores waiting for him and the long stretch of lonely road home when he heard it, a faint rustle, followed by a choked whimper. He stopped mid-step, scanning the dirt street, his gaze settling on the alley between the saloon and the old mercantile. At first, he thought it was just a pile of rags someone had left behind, but then the shape moved. She was there, a young woman, her dress torn, skin bruised, and eyes wide with fear. She struggled to hold a thin blanket over her shoulders, but the wind tugged it away, revealing crimson scratches and the trembling of someone who'd been running for far too long. "Please, cover me," she whispered, her voice breaking like dry twigs underfoot. Jack dropped his sack without a second thought and stepped toward her, his boots crunching on the dirt, his shadow falling over her like a shield. He didn't ask who she was or what happened. The fear in her eyes told enough. From the far end of the street came the sound of hooves, slow and deliberate, like predators closing in. Jack glanced up and saw two riders, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats, dust swirling around their horses' legs. The air thickened with tension, the kind that made every breath feel heavier. Jack crouched in front of her, lifting his worn coat from his shoulders and wrapping it around her shaking frame, the scent of leather and hay surrounding her like a wall. "Stay behind me," he murmured, his voice calm but edged with something dangerous. The riders drew closer, their silhouettes growing sharper in the fading light, and every set of eyes peering from shop windows knew something was about to snap. Jack's hand hovered near the worn handle of his revolver, not yet pulling it, but ready if the moment demanded. He wasn't the kind of man who went looking for trouble, but when trouble came for someone who couldn't fight back, Jack Harlow became the kind of man who made trouble wish it had never shown up. The woman clutched the coat tighter, her breathing uneven, and whispered something he couldn't quite catch, but he didn't need to. The message was clear. She was counting on him. The riders stopped just short of the trading post, their horses snorting, the taller one leaning forward with a smirk that sent a cold knife of anger through Jack's chest. "That ain't your business, rancher," the man called, his voice dripping with arrogance. Jack didn't move, his boots planted in the dirt, his shadow stretching toward them like a dare. The town seemed to hold its breath, the silence broken only by the creak of saddle leather and the soft whimper of the woman behind him. Somewhere deep inside, Jack knew that after tonight, nothing in Dry Creek would be the same. And as the dying sun slipped behind the mountains, the first star flickering in the darkening sky, he decided if these men wanted a fight, they were going to get one. But they were going to learn something first. A man might live alone out on the range, but he doesn't stand alone when someone whispers for help. The taller rider's smirk widened as he dismounted, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust while his partner hung back on horseback, scanning the street with cold, calculating eyes. Jack could see the glint of steel at the man's hip, the kind of quick-draw iron favored by those who preferred intimidation over conversation. The woman behind Jack pressed her forehead into the rough leather of his coat, her trembling passing through him like an electric current, making every muscle in his body coil tight. "You hand her over, rancher," the man said, spitting into the dirt. "She's ours." Jack straightened slowly, the motion deliberate, his hand resting on his revolver's worn grip. "She's not yours," he replied, each word measured, like a nail driven into wood. A murmur rippled through the few townsfolk still watching from behind dusty windows. They all knew Jack wasn't a man of many words, and when he spoke like that, it meant he'd already made up his mind. The second rider finally swung off his horse, his boots thudding on the earth. The two men moving in a slow arc meant to box Jack in. Jack shifted his stance, keeping his body between them and the woman. Somewhere far down the street, the town's bell tolled faintly from the church tower, its lonely clang echoing through the tense air. The first man's hand inched toward his gun, but before the motion could finish, Jack moved, faster than either expected, his revolver clearing leather in a smooth, practiced draw that stopped with the barrel aimed dead center at the man's chest. The second rider froze, his fingers twitching just above his weapon. "Don't," Jack said, his voice steady, the kind that left no room for misinterpretation. For a long moment, no one moved, dust motes spinning lazily in the fading sunlight as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then, with a slow sneer, the taller man lowered his hand, his eyes flicking toward his partner. "This ain't over," he muttered, stepping back toward his horse. Jack didn't answer. He kept his revolver up until both men were mounted and heading back. The way they came, the rhythmic pounding of hooves fading into the vast silence of the plains. Only when they disappeared over the ridge did Jack holster his gun. He turned to the woman, crouching again to meet her eyes. "You're safe now," he said, though a part of him knew safety was a fragile thing out here. She looked at him for a long moment, her lips trembling, then nodded. He helped her to her feet, keeping his coat draped over her shoulders, and started walking her toward his ranch at the edge of town. Along the way, she told him in fragments a name, Mara, and a story about the two riders working for a man who believed people were property, if he could put a price on them. Jack listened without pressing, his jaw tightening at every detail. When they reached his ranch, the horizon was painted in deep purples and fading gold, the wind carrying the scent of sage and dust. He stoked the fire, brought her water, and found one of his late mother's old quilts to replace the coat. For the first time that day, Mara's shoulders eased, though her eyes still darted to the door now and then. Jack knew trouble would return. Men like that didn't like being told no. But as he sat across from her, the firelight flickering between them, he also knew that next time, they wouldn't find him alone. The thought of facing them again didn't bring fear. It brought a strange, quiet certainty, because somewhere, in that whispered plea, in those words, "Please, cover me," something had shifted in him. Out here on the edge of the frontier, life was hard and trust was rare. But once a man took a stand, he didn't back down. Jack Harlow wasn't going to let the darkness have her. And to anyone watching this story, remember, the world's still full of folks who need someone to step forward when no one else will. If you believe in standing your ground for what's right, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next tale. From the frontier, there are more stories out here, in the dust, and every one of them's worth telling.